Why won't you ride the Mercedes-Benz I gave you? The voice carried a severity sharp enough to slice through even the frozen winter air. The owner of that voice was my grandfather. The rear window of his car slid open, and he stared straight at me. The formula milk for my son, Ethan, was almost gone. That was the only reason I was standing outside in the bitter cold. Clutching the handle of a secondhand bicycle that had gone flat the moment I left the house, with Ethan strapped tightly to my chest in an old baby carrier, I walked on while he silently watched me. My husband was overseas, serving as a U.S. military soldier. During that time, I was living at my parents' house, where my parents and younger sister stayed. But that place was never truly mine. My independence was systematically stripped away, and everything, from how I raised my son to every single action I took, was placed under my family's control. The most cruel symbol of that domination was the car. It was a silver Mercedes-Benz my grandfather had given me to celebrate both my marriage and Ethan's birth. I was never once allowed to even touch the keys to that brand new car. You've just become a mother and you're exhausted. It makes more sense for your sister to use it so the car doesn't go to waste. That was what my parents said. And all I was given was an old bicycle. My grandfather's sudden appearance was completely unexpected. He seemed to understand everything before I even put it into words. His eyes moved back and forth between my utterly worn-out expression, his great-grandson in my arms, and the shabby bicycle beside me. In response to his question, I answered in a trembling voice. That was my first act of resistance. I only have this bicycle. Mary is the one driving the Mercedes. Those words changed everything. The expression vanished from my grandfather's face, and I could see a deep fury settle into his eyes. Without saying a word, he simply signaled to the driver with a gesture. The car door was opened. It was the first door leading me out of this hopeless situation. From that moment on, my counterattack, and ours, began. This is the record of my fight, alongside my son, to reclaim everything that was taken from us. As I sank into the back seat of my grandfather's car, warm air enveloped my frozen body. Ethan slept peacefully in my arms, breathing softly. Simply being physically cut off from the freezing world outside made me struggle to hold back tears. The bicycle was left behind in the snow, as if symbolizing my past self. My grandfather did not ask anything right away. As the car began to move quietly, he merely gazed at my profile in silence. That silence felt heavier than any interrogation. Eventually, he spoke. "Olivia, this isn't just about the Mercedes, is it?" Those words pierced deep into my heart. Fear resurfaced. I knew better than anyone the consequences of defying my parents and my sister. They had labeled me as ungrateful and mentally unstable and had even reported that to my husband. If I told the truth, they might try to take Ethan away from me as well. But my grandfather's eyes seemed to see straight through my hesitation. His gaze shifted to Ethan in my arms. That tiny presence gave me the final courage I needed. This child's future must never be ruled by that house. "Grandpa, this is not merely a family issue. This is a crime." I said it not in a trembling voice, but in a calm, steady, and unwavering tone. I relayed only the facts, concisely and without embellishment. The Mercedes that had been taken from me, the mail that was being managed without my consent, and the series of suspicious withdrawals from my personal bank account that I had maintained since before I was married. I had been told that, since I was still recovering poorly after childbirth, my mother would handle shopping and daily errands, and so I had entrusted her with my card, but the amounts being withdrawn were far too large to be considered normal living expenses. As I spoke, my voice gradually regained its strength. Each individual fact forced me to recognize just how abnormal my situation truly was. My grandfather listened silently until the very end. When I finished speaking, he said just one thing to the driver: "Head to the police station." His voice was as cold as ice, filled with an unshakable resolve. "Grandpa, please wait." I found myself shouting before I could stop. Wouldn't be too much. What would happen to... No matter what they had done to me, the fear of accusing my own blood-related family took control of me. My grandfather firmly grasped my hand. "Olivia, listen carefully. They are using the word family as a shield while stealing the future of you and Ethan. This is no longer a family matter. As you yourself just said, it is a clear and undeniable crime. And you can rest assured. From this very moment on, you and Ethan are under my protection." Those words were exactly what I had longed to hear for so long, yet what no one had ever said to me. All right, let's go to the police. I should also hire a lawyer and fight them then. Please, won't you help me? It was not a plea. It was a declaration of my resolve, addressed to a partner who would fight alongside me. My grandfather looked at me in surprise, and then a proud smile slowly formed at the corner of his mouth. That's my granddaughter. Of course, I will use every means at my disposal. The moment I heard those words, something that had been tightly wound inside me finally snapped, and a single tear traced its way down my cheek. It was the final tear of weakness I would shed in this story, and at the same time, the first tear of our counterattack. Never before had a place like a police station felt so intimidating. If my grandfather had not been beside me, I might have turned back at the entrance. When the car stopped in the parking lot, my grandfather told me, "Wait here for a moment," and made a single brief call on his smartphone. His profile bore the face of a cold, ruthless negotiator, the same man who had become a billionaire in the business world. "Olivia, there is nothing to fear. The person I just spoke with on the phone is your lawyer. He will support all of our actions from the legal side." Those words gave me a sense of reassurance, as if I had been handed an invisible shield. We entered the building, briefly explained the situation at the reception desk, and were immediately shown to a private room. The officer who handled our case was a seasoned female police officer. Her eyes carried a somewhat procedural tone, as though she were dealing with just another ordinary domestic dispute. "So, can you tell me what happened?" Prompted by her words, I began to speak. At first, my voice trembled. I was about to accuse my own parents and sister of being criminals. That reality tightened my throat with guilt, but the weight of Ethan in my arms compelled me to keep talking. I had to protect this child's future. As I moved from the story of the Mercedes-Benz to a detailed explanation of the suspicious flow of money from my bank account, the procedural look vanished from her face. She began moving her pen faster, occasionally firing sharp questions at me. "Did your parents give you any explanation for those withdrawals?" "They only said it was for the family's living expenses." "Were you personally given enough money to cover your own living costs?" "No, I was always told there wasn't enough." My grandfather, who had been listening to the exchange, quietly interjected, "Officer, that is not the only issue. I gifted my granddaughter a trust fund of $150,000 for her and her child's future. The documents should have been sent to her as well. Olivia, what happened to that money?" At my grandfather's words, I slowly shook my head. "What?" "I have never seen that kind of money or any documents like that, not even once." The instant he heard my answer, my grandfather's expression froze solid. He turned not to me but to the officer and spoke in a low voice. "I trust you understand now. There is a very strong suspicion that they concealed the very existence of the $150,000 that should have gone to Olivia, and that they have been illegally withdrawing funds from it as well." With that single statement, the atmosphere in the room completely changed. The female officer's eyes hardened with intensity. This was no mere financial dispute between parents and child. It was a calculated and malicious case of exploitation. She seemed fully convinced of that fact. When all the testimony was finished, the officer set down her pen and looked straight at me. "Thank you. I'm sorry for making you relive something so painful. We have officially accepted your report. We will immediately begin an investigation as a criminal case with strong suspicion of theft and fraud." Those words meant that the immense power of the law had finally taken my side. When we left the police station, the sky had already begun to darken. We got into my grandfather's car and headed toward his estate. It was in a completely opposite direction from the house where my parents lived. "Grandpa, what will happen from now on?" My voice trembled with anxiety. "We will act in accordance with the law, that is all." My grandfather's answer was concise. Yet within those few words was a weight that suggested he had anticipated every possible outcome. "The lawyer will come to see you first thing tomorrow morning, and there will be one more person as well, a forensic accountant who specializes in financial crimes. He will thoroughly trace the flow of money. We will uncover everything they took. Every last cent." There was no longer any hint of comfort in his words. They were a powerful declaration spoken by a commander preparing for the war ahead. Before long, the car passed through the gates of my grandfather's estate, a place I had visited many times as a child. It was a safe haven from my memories, filled with the warmth of a fireplace and the scent of old books. The staff greeted us quietly and guided us to a room where a crib had been prepared for Ethan. After laying Ethan down in the bed, the tightly stretched thread of tension inside me finally snapped, and I collapsed onto the sofa. Along with relief, a surge of intense anger washed over me. I would have to prepare myself to face my parents and my sister in a courtroom. There was no way they would remain silent and accept this. "Are you afraid?" My grandfather, who was suddenly standing beside me, asked me quietly. "No, I just feel anger, and I was thinking about what they might do next." Hearing that answer, my grandfather nodded with satisfaction. "Olivia, listen carefully. This is not a fight you started. It is a war they initiated. And during war, mercy is unnecessary. Stay close to Ethan tonight and rest well. Starting tomorrow, our counterattack begins." That night, for the first time in months, I was able to sleep deeply from the bottom of my heart. Ethan, perhaps adjusting quickly to the new environment, slept peacefully through the night without waking even once. The quiet and safety of my grandfather's estate soothed our exhausted minds and bodies. However, that peace did not last long. The next morning, when I woke up, I realized my smartphone was vibrating relentlessly. The screen was filled with an unbelievable number of missed calls and messages. Every single one was from my father, my mother, and my sister. When I opened the messages, I felt my heart turn cold. At first, they were filled with feigned concern. "Olivia, where are you? Is Ethan okay? Don't disappear without saying anything. You're making us worry." But as I continued to scroll, the tone of the messages gradually began to reveal their true nature. "You are an irresponsible mother. Bring the baby back here immediately. Who on earth put such stupid ideas into your head?" As the messages gradually shifted from concern to outright threats, my heart filled with a cold, burning anger. They still believed I was as powerless as I had been before. That arrogance was unforgivable. And then the message from my sister cut the deepest. "Mom and Dad are really worried now that you're gone. If there's been some misunderstanding, I want you to talk to us. But if you keep acting this selfishly, I might have no choice but to testify that you're mentally unstable and not in a condition to raise a child properly. I don't want to do that, though." It was an unmistakable threat, wearing the mask of kindness. At the same time as trying to figure out where I was, they had begun constructing a false narrative for the public and for my husband, that Olivia became mentally unstable and disappeared with her child without consulting anyone. A spine-chilling fear washed over me once again. Just then, there was a knock on the door, and my grandfather entered the room. Seeing the tension in my expression, he asked quietly, "What is it?" I turned my smartphone screen toward him. "Please look. They've just sent me the perfect evidence." After reading through the messages, my grandfather allowed himself a faint smile for the first time. "You're Olivia. Fear is their weapon, and it seems you've already begun to understand how they use it." As his words helped me regain a small measure of calm, the two men who had been promised arrived at the estate right on schedule. One was the lawyer my grandfather had described as the best in America, Mr. Thompson. The other was a forensic accountant specializing in financial crimes, Mr. Caldwell. They were the professional team assembled for the battle that was about to begin. Attorney Thompson was a man with sharp eyes, every bit the image of a brilliant legal mind. He first read through all the messages my parents had sent to my smartphone, then nodded quietly. "This is a textbook case of coercive control. They instill guilt in the victim and drive her into psychological distress. It's behavior the courts despise the most. They don't even realize they're digging their own graves." Next, Mr. Caldwell took a seat in front of me. True to his profession as a numbers expert, he began asking questions in an extremely neutral, businesslike tone, stripped of emotion. "Miss Olivia, regarding the bank account your parents were managing, do you recall ever signing a power of attorney or any document delegating access rights?" "No, not once." "And the $150,000 trust fund your grandfather gifted to you? Same situation, correct?" "Yes, I wasn't even told that it existed." After hearing my answers, Mr. Caldwell began tapping on the keys of his laptop. "We have already obtained court orders compelling full disclosure from all relevant financial institutions. We will trace every single flow of money down to the last cent. Who withdrew it, when, where, and for what purpose, and even the final destination of those funds. Everything. Their professional competence gave me an immense sense of reassurance. This was no longer an emotional tale of personal revenge carried out by me alone. It was the rightful recovery of my rights, grounded in unshakable facts, law and numbers. That afternoon, the first urgent report came in from Mr. Caldwell, the forensic accountant. Olivia, please listen carefully and try not to be shocked. From both your personal bank account and the trust fund you were never informed about, nearly $80,000 has been illegally withdrawn in total. We have confirmed expenditures for renovations to your parents' house, purchases of luxury brand items for your sister, and even payment for a cruise on a luxury liner. I caught my breath. My mother had said it was only for shopping for Ethan and daily food expenses. The lie and the sheer scale of their greed hidden beneath it made something deep inside me burn with rage. The figure, $80,000, was so heavy it almost lost its sense of reality in my mind. It was not merely a financial loss, it was complete betrayal by my family and a desecration of my son's future and mine. My body trembled with anger, and no tears would even come. Mr. Thompson listened calmly to Mr. Caldwell's report, but a clear spark of anger burned in his eyes. Olivia, calling this theft or fraud alone would be far too mild. This constitutes breach of fiduciary duty, financial fraud, and multiple felony-level offenses. These are extremely malicious criminal acts. In parallel with pursuing civil damages, we will also consider filing a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. Criminal charges. The words stole my breath away. It meant there was a real possibility of sending my own parents and sister to prison. For a brief moment, hesitation crossed my mind. But when I thought of what they had done, it was the consequence they deserved. They had tried to take everything from me, fully prepared to face the legal consequences. That evening, the situation escalated even further. The intercom at my grandfather's estate rang. On the monitor appeared the faces of my parents and my sister. Somehow, they had finally managed to track down this place. Olivia, we know you're in there. Come out at once. My father's furious shout echoed through the intercom. My mother put on a performance of collapsing into tears, while my sister hung her head like a tragic heroine. What I felt as I watched their farcical act was not fear, but contempt. My grandfather instructed a staff member to call the police at almost the exact same moment that I took out my smartphone and began recording video. Grandpa, please watch, I said calmly, continuing to record. Just as Attorney Thompson predicted, they came here and created irrefutable evidence of harassment and stalking with their own hands. Watching my words and actions, my grandfather placed a hand on my shoulder with a proud expression and spoke quietly. Yes, exactly. Olivia, you'll be all right now. It did not take long before the police arrived, issued a strict warning to my parents and sister, and ordered them never to approach this property again. After they were turned away by the police, I immediately sent the recorded video to Attorney Thompson. Grandpa, how did they know I was here? My grandfather gazed into the flames of the fireplace and answered calmly. They did not know, most likely. Rather, they panicked and concluded that this was the only place you could possibly go. He continued, If there is anyone who could give you the power to escape their control, it is me alone. They feared that, and at the same time, they had no choice but to gamble on it. What they did today was not a calculated strategy. It was nothing more than the howling of wolves whose prey had escaped. However, Attorney Thompson analyzed the incident from a different perspective. As he reviewed the police report, he said with a stern expression, Indeed, their actions were impulsive, but at the same time, this shows that they are so cornered and dangerous that they would completely ignore legal warnings. There is a real possibility that they may act even more unpredictably from here on. Then he turned to me. Olivia, you should inform your husband about this situation. If they try to make contact next, it will likely be with your husband overseas. They may tell him, your wife has become mentally unstable and abducted the child. There is an extremely high chance of that. That observation made me gasp. I then told my husband Ryan fragments of what was happening so far. My parents would surely exploit Ryan's goodwill and his love for me in order to pull him over to their side. If that happened, the situation would become even more complicated. I'll video call him tonight, I said with determination. I'll tell him the entire truth, in my own words. That was the next trial I would have to overcome. Taking Attorney Thompson's point into account, I voiced another concern. Um, what about the money still left in my account? Could they withdraw everything that remains? At that moment, Attorney Thompson relaxed his expression slightly for the first time. There's no need to worry about that, Olivia. Immediately after we filed the report with the police yesterday, we requested an emergency asset preservation order from the court, and it has already been approved. All of your accounts are now legally frozen and fully protected so that no one except you can access them. Mr. Caldwell added to his explanation, they can no longer move a single cent from your accounts. One reason they physically showed up here is because we have already stripped them of money, their most powerful tool of control. That fact brought me profound relief from the bottom of my heart. My counterattack was not driven by emotion alone. Legal and financial professionals had been steadily and decisively cutting off the enemy's supply lines, quietly and effectively, without me even realizing it. That night, I hardened my resolve and made a video call to Ryan, who was stationed at an overseas base. As my story unfolded, the expression on his face shifted from shock to confusion, and then to a quiet, simmering anger. Wait, Olivia. Ryan hesitated once, visibly conflicted. Your mother told me you were just a little unstable from postpartum exhaustion. Ryan, listen. I cut him off and told him the facts that Mr. Caldwell had uncovered. They used $50,000 from my account to pay their loans and credit card bills. This isn't some exhaustion-induced delusion. These are facts a forensic accountant confirmed. After a long silence, Ryan let out a deep breath. What settled in his eyes then was not doubt toward me, but a cold anger toward those who had tried to deceive us. That's unforgivable. They lied to me too. He spoke in the calm, steady voice of a soldier. So what can I do? Those words saved me. He believed me. You believe me? Of course, Olivia. You're my wife, and what they did is beyond unacceptable. His voice remained calm and strong, unmistakably that of a soldier. I'll act immediately. I'll consult the military legal office and request every form of support we can provide. And please give my regards to your grandfather. Tell him I'm grateful for protecting you and Ethan. After ending the call, I stared straight into the darkness beyond the window. I was no longer afraid of anything. With Ryan firmly on my side, our counterattack accelerated even further. Through the military legal office, Ryan prepared documentation proving that this case constituted a malicious exploitation of a service member's family, and sent it to Attorney Thompson. They thought they were just deceiving an ordinary housewife. They will soon realize what it means to lay a hand on the family of a U.S. service member. That documentation became a powerful weapon, reinforcing the legitimacy of our case in court. From the following day onward, our counterattack entered a new phase. Under Attorney Thompson's command, preparations for a decisive victory in court began in earnest, as evidence was systematically assembled piece by piece. In addition, his team uncovered another decisive piece of evidence. It was an official legal document created when my grandfather gave me $150,000 as a lifetime gift. That document clearly stated that the purpose of the funds was for Olivia herself and for the education and future of her child. My parents' actions were an unmistakable violation of that trust agreement. This is irrefutable, perfect evidence, Thompson said confidently while holding the document in his hands. In court, they will have no choice but to admit that they engaged in deliberate fraudulent conduct. Day by day, each newly reported piece of evidence amplified my anger, while at the same time bringing me a strange sense of calm. This was no longer an emotional family dispute. It was a legal process in which each piece of evidence objectively proved their crimes. Step by step, we closed in on them, the flow of money, legal documents, police reports, and military support. The castle of lies they had built was on the verge of collapse. On the day all the evidence was finally assembled, Attorney Thompson summoned my grandfather and me to his office. On the table stood towering stacks of thick files. They were a symbol of our quiet fury. Everything is ready, he said as he picked up one of the files. This is the final draft of the complaint to be filed with the district court. It seeks damages, the return of all assets that were unlawfully withdrawn, and a permanent restraining order against your parents and your sister. He continued, the moment this complaint is accepted and served on them, the real battle begins. There is no turning back. Olivia, I need to confirm your final decision. I did not hesitate for even a second in response to that question. What came to mind was the despair I felt on that freezing day, walking down the road while holding Ethan in my arms. I never want to experience that again, and I will never let my son experience it either. Please proceed. I will fight. A few days later, the complaint was formally accepted and sent to my parents' home by a court officer. That single sheet of paper drove a deep crack into the walls of control they had built. And then came the day of destiny, when I stood before the courthouse together with my grandfather. I had entrusted Ethan to a reliable babysitter. Beyond the heavy doors lay the place where I would sever ties with my past. Taking a deep breath, we stepped inside. Inside the courtroom, I saw my parents' and my sister's faces for the first time in a long while. They were accompanied by their lawyer, but the arrogance they once wore so openly was gone. In its place were exhaustion and unmistakable anxiety. When our eyes met, they awkwardly looked away. Seeing that, I knew it for certain. The balance of power had already reversed, starting from that very day. Soon the judge entered, and the courtroom was enveloped in silence. My heart was pounding violently, yet strangely, I felt no fear. The calm and resolute profile of my grandfather seated beside me gave me courage. Attorney Thompson stood and quietly opened his argument. The final act of our counterattack had begun. Attorney Thompson's presentation of evidence was flawless. My mother's recorded voicemail messages, in which her tone abruptly changed, and the detailed reports tracing the flow of money exposed their lies one after another. The defense claims that these expenditures were for family living expenses. Attorney Thompson pointed to the statements displayed on the screen with a laser pointer. However, what is listed here is a luxury brand handbag purchased by the younger sister, $5,000. And here, a luxury cruise vacation enjoyed by the parents, $10,000. Are these truly living expenses that should be used instead of supporting a daughter caring for a newborn? A loud murmur rippled through the gallery. My sister covered her face, and my father's lips trembled in humiliation. The defense attorney attempted one last resistance. Wasn't the plaintiff in a mentally unstable condition at the time due to postpartum depression? Is it not possible that she harbored delusions that led her to view her parents negatively? At that insulting question, a stir ran through the courtroom. I looked straight at him and answered clearly through the microphone. No, it is true that I was unstable. However, the cause was not postpartum depression. It was the result of constant psychological and financial control imposed by your clients. When a person's dignity is stripped away day after day, anyone would become unstable. Then, from the witness stand, I fixed my gaze directly on the three people seated at the defendant's table. I believed you were my family, but you betrayed that trust. I pointed to the report on the screen showing the flow of money. Here is the payment record for a $5,000 luxury brand bag purchased by Mary. On that very day, I told my mother that I didn't have enough money for Ethan's formula, and I was scolded and told it was because I wasted too much. On the day you departed for a $10,000 cruise, I was walking down a freezing road, pushing a bicycle with a flat tire. I continued. What you took from me was not just money. You took the confidence and dignity I should have had as a mother and as a human being. You treated me like a powerless, incapable child and tried to convince me that controlling everything was a love. I paused there and looked each of them in the eye. But that is not love. It is control and it is exploitation. I am not your property, I declared clearly. I am no longer afraid of you. Here, today, I sever ties with our past. There is no longer any place for you in our future. When my words ended, the courtroom was enveloped in complete silence, and my father quietly began to cry. Those were the tears that marked the end of his control. When my testimony concluded, the courtroom fell silent as if water had been poured over it. The defense attorney attempted to offer some form of rebuttal, but his words were weak and no longer reached anyone's heart. Before the overwhelming light of truth, every lie could only retreat into the shadows. With all proceedings concluded, the judge quietly opened his mouth. His voice was solemn and devoid of any emotion. After reviewing all evidence presented, this court renders the following judgment. The judge first addressed the flow of money. The court finds it clear that the defendants unlawfully withdrew a total of nearly $80,000 from the plaintiff's accounts and used it for their own purposes. Accordingly, the defendants are ordered to compensate the plaintiff for the full amount unlawfully withdrawn, together with applicable interest for delay. Next, the Mercedes-Benz. The court also finds that the defendants unlawfully possessed the vehicle gifted to the plaintiff by her grandfather. The vehicle shall be returned to the plaintiff immediately. Finally, the judge fixed my parents and my sister with a stern gaze. The most serious issue is the psychological and financial domestic abuse the defendants inflicted upon the plaintiff. This constitutes an extremely malicious form of coercive control that exploited the trust inherent in a family relationship. The judge paused briefly, then delivered the final ruling. Accordingly, the court hereby issues a permanent protective order prohibiting the defendants from approaching the plaintiff, Olivia, and her son, Ethan. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and incarceration. The gavel struck, and everything was over. I tightly grasped my grandfather's hand as he sat beside me. Then I exhaled deeply and slowly. It was the first true breath I had been able to take from the depths of my heart in more than a year. Several months later, I held the keys to my own apartment in my hand. Ethan was sleeping in the back seat, and in my hands was the steering wheel of that silver Mercedes-Benz. With my grandfather's support, our new life had begun quietly. As for what became of them, according to the final report from Attorney Thompson, they were forced to sell their house in order to pay the compensation ordered by the court. Mary, stripped of the Mercedes by court order, could no longer maintain her former luxurious lifestyle. Their reputation within the local community collapsed, and their former friends all distanced themselves, cutting off those relationships completely. And the three people who once controlled me, having lost everything, were left without even emotional breathing room, now spending their days in a small rented apartment, hurling blame at one another for their failures. The kingdom of lies they had built was so fragile that it collapsed under its own weight. I no longer think about them. Before me are my son's smile, which I must protect, and the warmth of my grandfather's unwavering support. Never again will their shadow fall across our future. The fight is over.